Good evening. Welcome to the premiere episode of POOP. My name is Janet Hanson, and I'm here with my colleagues, David Norland and Abner Perney. We got together and decided that we wanted to utilize the resource that Community Access TV is to bring some different viewpoints for discussion to the people of Salina, Kansas. And so we sat around and had some conversations, and here we are starting on this. My maiden effort will be tonight, and you're going to hear more from me, so I'm just going to turn it over to my colleagues. Next week's program is going to be David, and so I'm going to let David talk first, and then you'll hear from Abner. And actually, I said next week's, but it's actually in 2 weeks you'll hear from David Norland, and then in 4 weeks you'll hear from Abner Perney. So, David, tell us what you have planned for when you're in the driver's seat at POOP.
Well, it's important, I think, to have a little bit of a history, just a brief thing about how we got together. Mm-hmm. Abner had been for a long time talking about doing a television program with some of the titles, and it's Abner's, and he'll tell you about that. It's his POOP logo. But we all agreed that it would be easier if there were three of us sort of spreading the word, and with different ideas. We're not like in a box and we think the same exact thing. We have some similar ideas and principles, and in fact, one of my favorite ways of having the acronym POOP is preservation of our principles, because in my mind, that is exactly what we're trying to do here, is talk a little bit about what our principles are, what has kept us alive, healthy, and thriving over a long period of time, and we want to highlight those things. So, very briefly, what I'll do in 2 weeks, we don't know the exact air times of those, but we'll be talking about ALEC. Now, that's not a smart ALEC. It's actually short for the American Legislative Exchange Council. So if you are wondering why you have what, if you agree with me at least, really strange legislation going through our Topeka legislators' hands, perhaps into law, then you need to know about the American Legislative Exchange Council, which provides model legislation. So Greg Stevens from K-State Salina will be here. He has a program with some slides and some history, so that's what we'll be talking about. And at least hypothetically, later on, when we come back around, we'll be talking about the health department sometime around May, late April, early May. But really the idea that I have, at least for this, is that we'll just sit down and have kind of one-on-one conversations, hopefully with the kind of enlivening illustrations that Abner has some examples of. So, Abner, you need to talk about yours then.
Am I on? Okay.
Yeah.
At any rate, the POOP idea, for the straight poop about things political, is kind of what we started talking about 5 or 6 years ago. And the logo, the POOP that you saw at the beginning of the show, is actually a neon sign made by Salina's famous Freddie Elliott, neon artist, some years ago. So we finally, it took Janet to get us organized and get this thing going so that we can actually have a television program talking about a variety of subjects, and they'll be mostly current events or nearly current events. Maybe even we'll forecast the future a little bit. My first show in another month, actually, I'm thinking is going to be split into 3 components. First part is going to be talking about water. And the POOP part of it is planning our ongoing prosperity. One of my areas of interest is the whole concept of having a town out here in Salina that is going to survive climate change as it worsens, and is going to be like the last great city on the edge of the great American desert as it becomes more desert-like. So we have to be planning our ongoing prosperity, and a big part of that's going to be our water resources. Another one of my favorite subjects is, and I'm on a committee, is bicycling. I took it up again when I was 60 years old. I quit when I was 40 because I crashed and broke my collarbone, and then around 60 I just got intrigued again about bicycles and bicycling. So we're going to have an episode probably in every one of my shows, assuming there's more than one, pedaling on our pathways. And I've got a collection of bikes to talk about, and I'm a member of 2 kind of informal bicycling clubs, and I know a lot of interesting people that are daily bike commuters, and we may have some of them on, and may have some of our fun events about pedaling and making Salina a more bicycle-friendly city. And the third thing for my first show is going to be a discussion of the mail-in bond election, which is the first mail-in election that I've ever been able to participate in. It's, I guess the PUOP of that is polling of our people by mail. And on the 11th of March, the League of Women Voters will be having a program on that same subject. Don Merriman will explain the process. He'll explain how mail-in ballots are being used all around the country and some of the advantages of it compared to the traditional stand in line and mark a ballot or punch your choices into a machine. So polling of our people, all of which will be PUOP in March.
And we need to not let the moment go by without recognizing the fact that you are president this year of the League of Women Voters.
Right.
So
Lunch and
close
Learn,
to that.
March 11th,
Yeah. Yep.
noon at the library, the big meeting room downstairs called the Prescott Room, another P word that we need to work into PUOP.
But nonetheless, we feel like Salina is a vital community, and we feel like that many things that should be topics of discussion that Salinans engage on don't get discussed. And so we are hoping to make this into a vibrant segment that will come your way every 2 weeks, and we'll give you some thought-provoking ideas and hopefully create some discussion among Salinans. And we look forward to seeing you in the coming months. Welcome back to this segment of PUOP. Again, I'm Janet Hanson, and my first segment I chose to be on the topic of peacemaking in communities. And the reason that I thought that was an important topic is because I found myself as a very issues-oriented person becoming at times very angry and very frustrated by what I saw happening, by how the system didn't seem to be working to make things better. And so ultimately, I became interested in peacemaking as a venue to still make things happen, but I also found a really important component of peacemaking is the meditative aspect where you realize that you are part of something that is bigger than yourself. So peacemaking is very important to me. I think it's an important thing that touches many people, and even though they might not use the same language. And so my effort and my desire was to talk about peacemaking and how it happens in communities and how it affects our nation and our world. And towards that, I've invited a guest, and my guest tonight is Reverend Thea Neatveld, a Unitarian Universalist clergy serving congregations in both Salina and Hutchinson. She is also a planning team member and a mediator for the Salina Initiative for Restorative Justice, and also an instructor for K-State's Nonviolence Studies program. Thank you for joining me tonight.
I'm glad to be here, Janet.
And Thea is someone who has been a mentor to me and a guide in this journey. I've had other guides and other mentors, I'm happy to say, but through several interactions, primarily with the library's class program, I've taken a couple of her classes, and I found her to be someone that has a lot to offer on this topic. So welcome again to our inaugural program of PUOP. And so I guess what I want to start with you is why did you get attracted to the study of peacemaking?
I think my ideas were similar, or what happened to me was kind of similar. I've been an activist. I've been very interested in citizen involvement as long as I can remember. But I found myself kind of bumping up against the standard approach, which was sort of righteous indignation. And I think my interest, especially theologically, had to do with friendship and making friends and networking. And so I found myself kind of at odds with most people who were doing social justice work and what I thought was my spiritual path. So I really like the way Michael Nagler says nonviolence is the bridge between spirituality and activism. it kind of cuts through the inconsistency if you think you have to be angry in order to fight for the right. You don't.
Yeah.
In fact, the nonviolence idea is that the means or the way we act as we're doing our social justice work will become the end, will be how it all ends up. So how we do it is really important.
It is. It is. And I think it makes a difference in the way you feel from the inside as you do it. So it's really, really important. So
Totally.
that was what pushed you in that direction. What steps did you take towards becoming a peacemaker in your life? Someone who believed in and knew about and practiced peacemaking.
Remember when, right after 9/11, there was a whole lot of activism about let's not go to war over this, let's figure out another way, there must be another way. Well, I was out there, you know, I was just in a small town in Oklahoma then, but I was really trying to be involved in that positive way. And when I watched what happened and how our heartfelt efforts were ignored, I just got so sad. I thought, oh dear, you know, this is not democracy. The whole world was watching us. The whole world was kind of on the same side about this, and still we went to war.
Yeah. Some people would say we wasted a lot of goodwill.
Yes. So I didn't want to stay in that place, that sad place. And I thought, what do I know about this? And I thought, well, there's something about Gandhi. I saw the movie, you know, there must be something about that. So so I Googled Gandhi in India, and there just happened to be a march coming up in a couple of years. Well, by the time I did this, it was 2005. So I went to India and walked the Salt March, which was the same route that Gandhi had taken at the end of the Quit India movement, the kind of final 3-week walk. So I kind of literally walked in Gandhi's footsteps with people from India and around the world. And that just kind of solidified my dedication to nonviolence.
And so what led you to become a teacher of peace? Was that just an outgrowth of your theological studies, or was it something separate?
When I came home, I thought, oh, now what? Now what do I do? Now that I've hung out with these Gandhians and I've listened to especially people from India who had been committed their whole lives to Gandhi's ways and trying to make India the most democratic place possible, and all coming from a spiritual angle. I didn't know what to do with it back here. So I found Pace Bene, Pace Bene Nonviolence Service, and of course Pax Christi as a cousin of Pace Bene, or maybe parent. So I went to a training session in Oakland over a year and became a nonviolence trainer. And I did that, I think, so I could find other people who felt some of that same passion. I was looking for colleagues, and that's what I continued to do. Anyway, I think the teacher-learner part is I'm always learning. Those classes are full of learning for me.
Yeah, and it is exciting to know that there's, number one, other people seeking that same set of knowledge, and that there's other people that are wanting to work in that way. That's a really important part. One of the things that when you get into any kind of either nonviolence, nonviolent resistance, peacemaking, well, people often say, I'm sure you've heard it many times, people say that stuff just doesn't work. And so what kind of things do you say to people when they say, well, that just doesn't work?
Well, first of all, people lots of times have the idea that nonviolence is passive.
Yes.
And it's one easy way to describe it is there are two hands of nonviolence. And one is you will not hurt me or others, so I will resist whatever harm you cause. I will stop you from causing harm. the resistance part, and that is not passive.
Yeah.
The second hand is always outstretched, and that hand says, I will always recognize your humanity. I won't reject you or dehumanize you or demonize you. And let's see what we can do so that we can come to some common agreement, or everybody's needs are met in some way. But still, this hand is still here. So one thing is to make sure we don't start with the assumption of passivity. Even Gandhi said that passivity, he would be violent before he would be passive.
And not saying that he would prefer to be
Correct.
violent, but yeah, that's that there's really, and that's something I think that is poorly understood about the whole movement, is that what is not required is, you know, that you have to be willing to be trampled and self-sacrificing. That's not part of it. And so I actually have spent a little time looking at different ideas about peace, and I was trying to think about if I was going to talk to people and say, well, this is what I want you to know about peace. And I read a quote by a guy by the name of Leo Sandy, and he is a teacher of peace and a Navy veteran and a member of Veterans for Peace. And he wrote an article, and I cannot tell you how old it is because when things are on the internet, they're ageless. But I like what he said. He said, in its most myopic and limited definition, peace is the mere absence of war. O'Kane, who wrote in 1992, sees this definition as vacuous, passive, simplistic, and unresponsive escape mechanism too often resorted to in the past without success. This definition also commits a serious oversight. It ignores the residual feelings of mistrust and suspicion that winners and losers of war harbor toward another. The simplistic definition of peace is too broad because it allows us to attribute the term peace to states of affairs that are not truly peaceful. And so I guess I always think of this as peace with a big P. This is like world peace. But I actually think that that's all of what he wrote there and what he said there can occur in communities when there's conflict, if the conflict is not dealt with. And so I kind of like, I like thinking about, I think for too many of us, peace is not war. And in some senses, and this is probably kind of an abrasive outlook on it, so I'm expecting you to give me a little pushback on this, but I think especially of how we have tried a war paradigm for more than 10 years in Afghanistan. And it just seems like if that paradigm were going to work, we're going to deliver peace, that it would have already. And so I think that's where I think two things. That's where the idea that war is more powerful than peace kind of breaks down for me. And it's also, I mean, surely we can try some other things. We can try some of the things that you were talking about to bring some resolution to that situation, because a full military approach to it doesn't seem to have done so. So tell me what your thoughts are that. I mean, is it too abrasive? Is it too simplistic? Is it too dualistic?
I guess two thoughts. One is when our whole culture has assumptions of violence, it's hard to get out of that worldview. It's hard to realize there's a choice, that we do not have to look at it like winners and losers all the time for everything. We could look at it like, what might we find in common? How could we possibly collaborate or get everybody's needs to be addressed? Similarly, when we have a militarized culture, and I learned about this in Israel-Palestine, when our culture keeps on having more weapons or keeps on having more preparations for war, then the expectation, I mean, we just live into that expectation. So both from our intellectual worldview and from our material preparation or the militarization of our economy and our culture, both of those prepare us as if we had no other choices.
Yeah.
And we do have other choices. We have lots of other choices.
But it doesn't even seem like maybe what I would think as the aspect of our government that maybe should be responsible to do that would at least theoretically be the diplomatic corps or the Secretary
Right.
of State. It doesn't even seem like they think about it. It seems like the first tool they pick up is the military tool, and so
Too often.
it kind of keeps us stuck. And then this is something else that this gentleman said. He said, peace that depends on the threat and intention to kill vast numbers of human beings is hardly a stable or justifiable peace worthy of the name. And so I think that kind of is where I think about us going. And again, you and I both agreed when we kind of talked about this before doing it that the idea of redemptive violence is one that we could spend a whole program talking about. But I kind of want to give it a plug.
Okay.
And so to me, I decided that if I was going to ask this question, I better be ready with a definition. To me, the idea of redemptive violence is the idea that if there's just one more military thing, one more thing we do that causes peace, then we'll have peace and we'll have order in the world and it'll be all better. Is that kind of a good description, not really definition, but description of redemptive violence?
I learned it with cartoon shows.
Yes.
That all of our Roadrunner cartoons or Popeye or whatever,
Yeah.
you know, we just keep building on the violence until finally there's one less violence and that succeeds. So we teach our kids from very young age that if we just do the final thing, that violence will take care of all the other, then that will win and achieve success.
Until the next time. But there's something kind of,
cyclical about it.
That's
We call it the cycle of violence. And of course, vengeance and anger and fear all play into, I'm going to be the one who attacks next time.
Yeah.
So it feels like there's no other answer if you're caught in that cycle of violence.
And so I'm going to kind of take a little right turn here. And I think when we think a lot about really war-torn or really conflict-torn parts of our world, it's really easy for me to think of Israel-Palestine. And I would say that probably I was the original person that didn't really know much about what was going on in Israel and Palestine. It just always seemed like there was a lot of fighting over there, and I didn't really know enough about it to know whose fault it was. It just seemed like something that kept going. And then I read President Carter's book several years ago, Palestine, Peace Not Apartheid, which is a book that still brings a lot of, I would say maybe tough or strong feelings for a lot of people. But he kind of talked about the historical background of that struggle, and it literally goes back to biblical times. And it amazed me because in the 20th century, he said that the historical chronology starts with 1917 when Great Britain during World War I issues the Balfour Declaration promising a Jewish national home in Palestine with respect for the rights of the non-Jewish Palestinians. And then it just keeps going on and on. And sooner or later it starts to catch up to events that we all recognize, but it's got such a long history, such a deep and painful history. And so I was really interested to hear that that's somewhere where you took your knowledge and your dedication to nonviolence and peacemaking too. And so I wanted you to tell us a little bit about your trip to Israel-Palestine.
Okay. I have a friend who wanted me to go. She asked me to go. Mm-hmm. She said she would go, but she was too old. What can you say? Mm-hmm. So I went. Mm-hmm. That was in 2009, and it was with Interfaith Peace Builders, and the name of this trip was Meet the Peacemakers. So the goal of the trip was to introduce the delegation, about 20 of us, to Israelis and Palestinians who were doing their part. Mm-hmm. So we met a lot of people from a wide range of angles on the conflict.
And so both Palestinians and Israelis, Jewish people and Muslim people, and maybe some Palestinian Christians? Did you meet
Yes,
some of those?
yes, we did.
Okay.
Yes.
And so what did they teach you?
Woo. I have to say, when I came home, I really didn't know what to do. It was harsh. It was a harsh place to be. And what I admired about them was people were choosing these harsh conditions to every day go back and do their piece, their part of peacemaking. For example, there's a Nomika Zion and another guy, I can't think of his name, but they established an urban kibbutz in Sderot near Gaza. And they established it with the purpose of making friends with the Palestinians right across the other side of the separation wall. So every week they would have a phone call with the people right across the wall. The bombs would come over. The bombs were coming, trying to get a power station just on the other side of their village. But they planned events together. Like when we were there, they had just finished a day of erase racism that the Palestinians on one side and the Israelis on the other side had decided to do together. But there were so many Palestinian bombs coming into that little village that Nomika told us that mostly they had slept in bomb shelters for 3 years, and that you couldn't call it PTSD because it was ongoing.
Yeah.
So I didn't know that. I didn't know that was happening in Israel right now. And then, of course, we went to visit refugee camps, and we met Suhir Odwa. This is a woman who one day Israeli police came. It was in 1948. Israeli police came and said, "Get out of your house, go over there." Her house and her whole village were destroyed. That was Nakba. That was the day of the destruction of 400 Palestinian villages. They were pushed into, for Bethlehem for a while, and then into a refugee camp. UN came in and they lived in tents. She was just like 10 or something at that time. So in her lifetime, she has been an internally displaced refugee. And she's raised her children in that way. Oh my gosh, I mean, can you imagine?
Yeah.
And then they've watched the wall, the separation wall. I think that wall and the security gates where everybody has to pass through no matter what is why why Gaza and the Palestinian areas are called an open air prison, which you brought up.
Yeah.
But there are guns from the second you get off the plane. There are these big rifles with young Israeli soldiers. The Israeli Defense Forces are everywhere. So it's a very militarized state. We spoke with a woman at a rural kibbutz who said Israel isn't a country with an army, it's an army with a country. And that her mission was to keep bringing up, we never intended to live like this. This wasn't what Israel is about. And so that's what she does. That's what she talks about day after day. She goes to school, she goes any place so people will hear her and say, this isn't what we want our country to be about. Right. And then she comes to the US and says, you're the ones giving us the weapons.
Yeah.
So I think the other thing that I really got out of my visit there was how complicit the United States is in that conflict, that ongoing conflict. $3 billion in weapons a year, which is, I think, $8 million a day in weapons.
Yeah.
That's a lot of complicitness. Or
yes, it is. A lot of complicity.
A lot of complicity.
And a lot of suffering, just a lot of suffering. Because you saw suffering on both sides of that issue.
Yes.
You saw it in Israeli faces and in Palestinian faces.
That's right. That's right.
And so, it's just an excruciating sort of thing to see. And so, Why does Interfaith Peace Builders send people like you there?
The goal is to make sure that we know the truth.
Mm-hmm.
It's interesting, the frame, I mean, the kind of philosophical frame that we get most of the time and most of the news coverage, that this land was always expected to be for Jews. Not so, it was, that, but anyway, and that all Jews are doing is defending their land, and that Israel, well, and that people, when they're anti-Semitic, that means that they're anti-Israel,
Right.
Not separating out the idea that anti-Semitism is racist. Zionism is something else. Zionism is all about taking land and knowing that having that belief that that land is theirs by religious right. And then there's the human rights angle on it. 10 years ago, the United Nations said the way that Israel is pushing the people of the Palestinian people around and making them live in smaller and smaller and smaller territories is a crime against humanity and should be stopped. 10 years ago they said that.
Yeah.
I didn't know that. I mean,
No.
until I was there and they kind of made sure that we realized. And then there's the boycott, divestment, sanction campaign going on. And a lot of the peacemakers we met, Israelis, supported boycotting, divesting, sanctioning their country because they believed that the approach that they're using right now is wrong. That was amazing. I mean, can you imagine supporting a boycott of your country? But they want something different. They want to live differently.
And they want something different probably for their children.
Absolutely.
And actually, when I see it, with all of its complications and all of its difficulties, when I read about it, I am struck by the parallels between what the United States government, you know, our government, us by extension, has done to Native Americans. I mean, the parallels are very similar. There's been difficulties and wrongs on both sides, but there really isn't too much, and this is what always strikes me about it. It's not too difficult to look at this situation and know who holds most of the cards, who has the upper hand in terms of the power balance. And in the United States, it's the government, and in that situation, it's the Israeli government. And so it seems like when you have that much more power, you have a lot more responsibility too. But it makes it a difficult thing. And so what did that make you want to bring home to your own peacemaking? It really seems like a huge exercise in seeing both sides of an argument. That's really, which is probably the most profound part of doing any kind of peacemaking.
Yes, one of the women we talked to said, you lose your humanity when you lose empathy. And she believed her country, Israel, was losing its empathy. And so I think if there's something that echoes, you know, empathy is the foundation of compassion. And if we ever lose our empathy in any political dispute or our compassion for this other human being who has, then we've lost our peacemaking capacity.
Yeah, I think that's really profound. And to me, I actually think about your trip to Israel-Palestine as an experience in peacemaking with a capital P on the global scale, on a much larger scale. But I'm also struck by the way that you came back to Salina, and now we're not gonna spend a lot of time on it, but I want to give you a little opportunity to talk about what you're doing to bring peacemaking in the first person to the community of Salina through Restorative Justice.
Okay. I think four of us are a team working on the planning aspects of the Restorative Justice, Salina Initiative for Restorative Justice, and that is so lovely. We have no hierarchy, we have collaboration, and just to work with three other women who are as committed and have different angles on this issue, way more depth in the community than I have, has been such a joy. So
Can
restorative
you
justice.
name your partners?
Of course.
Yeah.
Ann Zimmerman,
Uh-huh.
Janelle Murphy,
Uh-huh.
and Martha Ray.
Yeah, great. That's great.
So
And what does restorative justice look like in Salina, Kansas?
what restorative justice is a way of thinking about repairing the harm when harm's been done, holding the offender accountable, and thinking about what the victim needs. So asking or ensuring that the offender does something to repair the harm they did and in a way that addresses the victim, that heals the victim in some way, or repairs, gives restitution. So we did a little workshop on mediation and restorative justice, and we thought about in our community, what would that be? What would be a place to start? And juvenile offenders was the place we decided to start. So Ellen Mitchell has been very supportive all along, and now we have Charlie Altduel as the juvenile prosecutor under Ellen. And they support the project by giving us first offender juveniles whose crime, whose offense isn't terribly harsh, isn't frightening to or dangerous to the community. I'll put it that way. So then our project is bringing the offender with the victim and having a conversation between the two of them, facilitating the conversation, figuring out what it is the offender needs to do to make it as right as possible for the victim. And then we write up an agreement, and then the offender keeps the agreement. And then the prosecutor dismisses the charges. The judges are very supportive of the program, and it's very satisfying as a mediator. A couple nights ago, I was with a couple of girls who had been in a dispute, and when they left, they hugged, and I was just like, oh my gosh. Because that doesn't happen when they go through the court system.
No,
Our courts aren't meant to bring people closer in community and reconcile people who've been enemies, and this is a project that is.
And so you guys have been mediating cases for more than a year now?
About a year and a half.
And about how many cases, or do you know that number?
70.
That's pretty good. That's pretty impressive. And most of you, all of you are volunteers?
We got a grant from the hospital foundation, and so we have always intended that the mediators would be paid. So we are paid by the case. Now, we do a lot of other things volunteer, but when we mediate, we get paid as certified mediators. So, and then we have a whole bunch of people who are co-mediators who help out. They get paid a little bit, but the community is really, as soon as somebody explains why this is a good way for the offenders to learn and how it benefits the victims, we've just had fabulous community support.
It's really interesting to me because I was looking at the New York Times website yesterday, and they were talking about children being kicked out of school for various offenses, and a lot of schools have seen that happening disproportionately to students of color, and they realized that they really weren't bringing those kids to graduation, which is really the big miss, the really important thing that they're missing. And so they mentioned that as one of the strategies that they were using was restorative justice in schools. And they've always tried peer mediation, but sometimes I think it seems like the restorative component is pretty important too.
Yes.
And so what are some things that you've seen kids doing that fall under the canopy of restoration, an active restoration towards another person?
Fights. Just a kid gets into a fight in the hall.
Right.
Stealing cell phones.
So does restoration mean they say, I'm sorry? I mean, that might be one example, right? But it might also be, is there ever like an effort to restore property if something was stolen?
Totally, yes.
Yeah.
Yes, if their thing that they took cost $50 or $500, the person who took it is responsible to pay the victim.
Yeah.
So they don't, well, sometimes that happens in court, but sometimes it doesn't.
No, I know. It's because the court is more like looking at the law And this is also interested in the law, but it's also interested in creating kind of reconnection so that people can still be in the community together.
That's right, and they have a chance to ask each other questions like, what's behind this? Why did you do this? And sometimes, almost every time, almost every mediation I've had, somebody has some, well, usually both of them, have some understandings they didn't have before they came in that room. And so there's something behind what, you know, something's going on. It doesn't come out until they're in a safe place. Nothing's going to go out of that room. It's not the court. So they learn more about each other, and that's how you can reconcile and increase the connections in the community.
And so I know that you guys are 1 year into your project, so you probably don't have a lot of outcome type information yet, but outcomes have been, across the country, have been positive. Nothing ever is like, gadzooks, it's going to cure everything. It's never like that, but it is something that maybe helps people not come back into the juvenile justice system, helps them.
Exactly, and if we could go a little further in integrating restorative justice climate and restorative justice discipline in the schools with our program, I think it would be a very smooth system. We're not there yet, but we have aspirations, and I think there are definitely people in the school system who are interested.
Yeah, because it is, I think schools really want to graduate kids. They, you know, I always say that we have a lot of systems in our public school system that says, okay, if this is where you're ready to come back into, you can come back in here. But gee, if we could keep them in the first place, that would be so much better. That would be so much better. Let's see. What else do you I think we're probably at our summary point. So is there any other final thoughts that you want to share with us about restorative justice, or if people want more information about it? I know you guys have a website, and I was going to write that down, but I don't know that I did.
Yeah.
I'll make sure that I have it at the end of the program. It'll be there.
Okay.
Yeah, but we do, and just to know that that's another resource that's available in our community. Well, thank you so much for joining us for our inaugural POAP program, and hopefully we've helped people in Salina learn a little bit more about how peacemaking looks in the first person, how it looks in people's lives, what it makes them, you know, where it makes them travel, all the places you'll go, and also how it can look in communities. So thank you very much.
Thank you.